Thank you for being here. My name is Daniel Peabody. I'm a director here at Elizabeth Leach Gallery, and I'm just going to welcome you and give a little introduction. And in case I'm assuming you know this, it's a talk on Mark Smith, who has the show up right now. Mark did his BFA at the Cooper Union in New York City. And his MFA at Portland State University here in Portland. You probably know his work and seen it in many places, but he was included in 3 Oregon biennials at the Portland Art Museum in 1995, 1997, and 2001. He's been with the gallery for 20 years this year.
Wow.
He has commissions that you can see around the city at Lewis and Clark College. He has one at Oregon Department of Transportation in Salem. He did another one for Port of Portland, which was just down the road and is now out near the airport, I believe, and a really fabulous outdoor piece for TriMet a few years ago downtown. He also is in the collections of Nike here in Beaverton, City Arts in New York, and the American Embassy in Ghana. So those are just a few highlights. Linda Tesner is going to be in conversation with him today. She's the director and curator of the Ronna and Hoffman Gallery of Contemporary Art at Lewis and Clark College, where she has been director for 17 years. She prior held positions at the Portland Art Museum and Maryhill Museum. And the current exhibition at the Hoffman Gallery is Eric Stodic, which is up for a few more weeks, I believe. And some past exhibition highlights that they featured there have been a show by Alison Sarr, Alan Saluk, Dana Lynn Lewis, Stephen Hayes, Darren Watterson and Tyrus Miller, Michael Knutson. It's nice to have 2 of those people here in the room. And they did the 20 years of Bonnie Bronson Fellows a few years ago. So I will, with that, hand it over to them. I think they're going to have a conversation. I think they'll welcome questions, and it's up to you guys.
Great.
Yeah, you're welcome to save us if we need saving.
Yes. Yeah, I would say ask questions. If something occurs to you, just flag us down and we'll veer in your direction. But can I start with a question?
Sure.
Could you talk about why this series is called The Silk Road? The title of the exhibition?
Sure. And first of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming. I see lots of friends and colleagues and some students and people I don't know even, and that's wonderful. And I also wanted to introduce my wife, Maria Asensio. She is my often collaborator. I want to mention her because if you see her eyes rolling, then it probably means I'm reaching about something, because we've shared a studio for 30 years and she kind of knows everything. But anyway, thanks everyone for coming. So the question was what? The Silk Road.
I want you to talk about the Silk Road and how this work in particular references the theme of Silk Road.
Sure, and I just had this short conversation with Bob DeZono, who asked me, had I been on the Silk Road? Absolutely not. I claim no authenticity here. I've been to parts of Asia. I've been to Europe. I have not been to the Middle East. So it's not necessarily a travelogue. But I suppose the interest in the title is that I've had a long-standing relationship with textiles, and obviously the trade routes there were something that always caught my interest. And then also, I want to just say that I would describe myself as a populist formalist, in that where the works maybe appear quite formal, but there's always some kind of narrative tied to it. I like to contextualize it. I could talk about this work, and I can discuss it in a very formal way, but really it's kind of the story, or kind of bringing in something else that surrounds it that I enjoy kind of addressing more. In this sense, I was making these geometric works first, and then as I was making these works, there was a story, kind of national story that was circulating about the dark website, the Silk Road dark website, which was a place. It was a website that was basically originated to promote absolutely free trade without any market restrictions, no regulations whatsoever. It was generated by Ross Ulbricht, who's now in prison. and many of you probably know about the Silk Road. It was it became kind of a forum for trading primarily drugs, illicit narcotics, that sort of thing. So what caught my interest is that I had this kind of interest in travel, in textiles, this kind of expansive sense of space in doing these works, but then that's kind of an actual space, and then the Silk Road website was a virtual space. And so all about kind of this imagined space, or that obviously produced real things. You can trade drugs through Bitcoin and so on. But I kind of was interested in those two types of realities. And then just to answer, just to extend that a little bit more, as I was doing these, people would say, well, it looks really computery, it looks kind of like computer circuitry and so on. And then, but then making them is super labor intensive, so that I kind of, it was interesting how they might be perceived, but then they were, in a sense, quite really, really labor intensive and hard to do, and involved real time. They weren't digital at all.
I want to talk about how the paintings are made, but could you first talk a little bit about the iconography in these small square pieces? Like, I really like that you reference some of the Mesopotamian artifacts that are fast and furiously disappearing through acts of cultural violence. And I'm just wondering, what's the through line between like a bong and an artifact from many centuries before?
Well, that's the narrative I was just had mentioned. I wanted to contextualize the work, the larger artworks, with a narrative, so that would have you could really have kind of some sort of narrative access to. So these smaller works reference both the actual Silk Road, the historical Silk Road. So you see artifacts from that several hundred years time span, and then combined with those are some artifacts from the Silk Road website. So then you see a skull pipe or a bong or something like that. And then I'm kind of creating this hybrid reality, kind of a fictitious reality, where it's the historical, it's the virtual, and then it's my own kind of insinuation into that process. So I built these pedestals for the artifacts out of the patterns from my own fabric designs. And then they're printed, these are laser cuts, but they have kind of a relationship to offset printing from the newspaper and so on. So I wanted them to have a little bit of an archival-y look. So they have kind of a grainy quality. They've got these big open kind of dot matrix patterns, halftones. And so basically that's what you're seeing there. And so you get some kind of reference point by looking at those. And then these may become more expansive as a result of seeing how those define the larger works.
I've been watching your work for a really long time now, over 20 years, and I'm always very interested in what you are making, but I'm always very interested and impressed by how you make things. There's a tremendous level of craftsmanship and meticulousness that I really admire as sort of an objects-based curator. Do you mind talking about how these pieces are actually made, like starting from where do you get the stripes and?
Sure. So I think I mentioned I've had this relationship with textiles, fabric. I just respond to that sort of thing. If we go to the museum, I'm always, I'm looking at the paintings, and then I end up in I end up spending more time in the textile areas. And they're just very rewarding to me. So I'm starting with this fabric as kind of a vocabulary, and I've always just been drawn to that. I like the idea of having a ready-made, something I can just start with and kind of frame my process around that. And so I go to the Goodwill bins and I collect things. For a long time, there's been just an array of kind of patterns that I figured that I could rescue, clothing I could rescue and kind of manipulate some way. And lately, it's been more confined just to striped cotton knits, cotton and poly cotton blends. Wool doesn't work, so I take, and there's stripes, vertical or horizontal stripes, so I'll take the panels out of the clothing, flatten them, stiffen them, and then it's kind of it's related to printmaking, I would say, because it's kind of a reverse process. But all of these little patterns are from obviously a larger T-shirt or skirt, and then they're flattened so they can be manipulated and then cut into strips and then mitered.
And then mitered. Yeah, I always marvel at the mitering.
Right.
Well, do you all remember sculptural work that Mark did not so many years ago, but they looked like inflatables, but they were clear plastic sculptures that were stuffed with fabric. Can you kind of talk about how they seem, when you think about sculpture and the kind of the free-formness of the stuffing compared to these paintings that are so structured in terms of line and composition, can you kind of talk about how, certainly I feel like these have evolved from the sculptures. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think the relationship between those two things was sort of, it's just an evolution where you get to understand the material and just want to investigate it fully. I think that compressing fabric into really, really tight kind of bound structures like the spheres that you referenced in the wall pieces. Clothing, something about it, compressing it became the material, the fabric, something that people wear became very solid, kind of sculptural pigment, kind of solid pigment kind of thing. And I'm interested in that quality. If you look at them, the red is not a membrane like paint. The red is a material, and it's like it's red all the way through. It's just the same on the back as in the front. And I respond to that. Mm-hmm. Also, the fact that the people inhabit the clothes first. There's some sort of resonance from the energy of its former inhabitant.
Which references your community-based work.
Yeah. And then you go in, going to the Goodwill bins, for instance, it's a very social kind of thing. The As Is store, and Portland has one on the Bluff Boulevard. And it's very social, and I'm a churner, so I go along, and people kind of follow me because I go in and churn. Kind of like rain was on the bottom, back to the top, and then people from all different strata come, and people are going there to kind of find clothing that they can remarket. People are going there to just like find clothes they can wear. Some people are quilting, like me. So that's social, but yeah, it was always something you could get. If it was a public work, you could involve people in the process by soliciting cast-off clothing and then kind of just respond to it.
You've said something to me that has always impressed me about these paintings, and it's a thought that makes me feel like we should do an exhibition of your work at the Hoffman Gallery that's called Painting Without Paint.
Right.
Because I feel that all of this work involves issues pertaining to the act of painting or the formal issues surrounding painting, but you're not using a brush, you're certainly not using pigment. Would you mind kind of going through that list of how you feel that these pieces are essentially paintings without paint?
Yeah, they're presented like paintings. They're kind of constructed like paintings, where and that is a very formal kind of process where you're dealing with color. I like the idea that the color is there already, and so I'll try to make a green painting, but there just isn't enough green fabric to make a green painting exclusively. So then other colors will enter into the process, or a red painting or a blue painting, and that's all very formal. I think that when I was developing, Marie and I were both at Cooper Union, and this was in the 80s, and this was during the pictures generation when there was a lot of distrust. Painting is always kind of the target, isn't it?
Isn't it?
But a lot of distrust regarding the author's hand. The idea that you would show your hand in your work. And at the same time, and that was, to me, that was very cynical. I don't know if I totally identified with that process, that way of thinking, I should say. You might remember an essay by Thomas Lawson, Last Exit Painting, and that was kind of in circulation at the time. And then at the other end of the spectrum, at the Cooper Union, it was a very esoteric kind of community. There was a painter, Jake Berthaud, there, And I remember we would sit for maybe 6 hours in a critique and smoke cigarettes and you know, put them out on the floor, and then, you know, there would be silence for long stretches of time, and Jake would say, that's just not really done in good faith. And kind of, a really kind of esoteric comment like that. And I couldn't really identify with that either. I didn't feel like I had the credentials. I respected that. But so I felt always like there was someone looking over my shoulder. And I couldn't be a painter. It was too, a real painter. It was just too fraught with all kinds of issues and
tradition.
And too much choice. And at some point I evolved to this idea of like limiting my choices and working with something like this. So now I kind of thinking like a painter. I'm thinking about in this one someone like Bryce Martin who takes these kind of creates armatures, these kind of interlocking linear patterns, and places them figure ground, interlocks them, and so on. So I'm dealing with it like a painter, but approaching it more like a quilter might. And I love quilts. So, I could look at quilts all day, and I think what ultimately is dissatisfying about the quilts is that the symmetry. So I want to make my perfect quilt where I'm dealing with a kind of perfection, a kind of symmetry, but then not an overall symmetry. And so.
Is there any part of this work that you would call painterly?
Yeah, in terms of I don't know. Really.
I don't know either.
In terms of in the smaller prints, they're very painterly with the kind of fields of kind of washes of color. They're painterly in terms of how I'm trying to deal with, this here, the red is lighter and it advances, where it kind of recedes there. Where here, the red recedes, and then this red kind of advances. So that's a very painterly thing. And that's just kind of intuitive, you just do it, you just work with it, just like matching your clothing, matching your trousers to your shirt. What's that?
The dark red comes forward to the...
Dark red?
Oh, okay, well, yeah, in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But yeah, but then it's kind of the thing where you're just trying to make it feel like it's you're getting this, I'll say it, I'm sorry. Push and pull. painter term, but you're getting a push and pull with what's going on.
But I also love the way you color mix in your paintings. For example, this stripe that is, if you look very close up to it, it's blue and red, but the eye mixes it as kind of a purpley color. And that happens, I think that happens with a lot of the stripes.
Yeah, optical mixture. And then we're going back to there's something I wanted to touch on too, and going back to this idea of use of the Silk Road as kind of a metaphor, the real and the virtual Silk Roads. There's the actual trip, the kind of being in space and moving through space and kind of completing this epic journey. And so all of these are circuits. That's something that was kind of interesting to me. And then there's the trip, the altered state, that you get through the use of drugs or other substances that kind of alter your experience. So there's a kind of a trippy aspect to these. Like if you're high and you're doodling, kind of and then there's also this kind of like circuitry that kind of leads you back to the. That's the thing about these is that they're always leading you back to the beginning. And I was thinking about those ancient trade winds. And that was kind of the one rule I had. It had to, every circuit had to be completed.
Complete. Well, that brings me to my next question, because I think we really first started talking about your work seriously when I was working on a map exhibition, an exhibition of artists and maps. And you had done some work, both public art projects and personal work that involved maps many years ago. And these feel very map-like to me. I love that they are, that they have a sense of like a bird's eye view of something that might be architectural or map-like or geography. Can you talk about that a little bit? Do you feel like that too?
Well, yeah, they're going to look like maps, and they're And I had no, and that's something, you know, sometimes I consider the shape, what it ought to look like. Here it was more of an organic process, but there were two kinds of things I was going for, which were the curvy kind of thing, which I think in some of these shows up where it does suggest a landform, a peninsula of some kind, something, you know, actual, like a bird's eye view, and others which were kind of more like mental maps or computer maps, like more kind of grid-like.
Diagrams.
Yeah, diagrammatic, yeah.
Diagrammatic.
And I was consciously thinking, okay, virtual, actual, and that's, although these are abstract, they do kind of reference those types of things. Yeah.